content team of the Global Supervisors Network, and I'm joined today by Sam Isaacson. Sam is the founder of the Coach Tech Collective, who are wrestling with cutting-edge technology in coaching and supervision. He's previously the chair of the Government Trailblazer Group for the Coaching Apprenticeship, and he is an author of coaching and technology books, most recently, the Digital and AI Coaches Handbook. Sam, welcome.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for making the time today, Neil.
Super. I've had a little look at the work that you're doing around AI in coaching supervision. It looks fascinating, but AI is a broad field. So perhaps you could start off by explaining which aspect of AI you're talking about and some of the basic principles.
Right. Well, that's quite interesting because AI is one small part of what I see as the technology landscape, which is extraordinarily vast. And AI happens to be flavor of the month because we saw huge disruption coming in with the introduction of ChatGPT. And what is interesting to me, I suppose, as a coach, a supervisor who's been writing about technology for some time, I was writing about what was called at the time GPT-3. That was what it was known as before ChatGPT came along. And I was saying, this is a really interesting technology. I think it's going to hit the coaching world. I think we ought to be sort of getting aware of what that is. And then, of course, ChatGPT came out and the entire coaching world has gone, we need to wrestle with this new challenge. And now I'm thinking, this is old stuff. There's other things that we should be thinking about, which I can see in my little pockets of the internet. People are talking about, they're being developed. We're going to see them coming into the mainstream, some very soon, some, of course, after some delay, after they get adopted by the early adopters. And so the reason why I find myself talking about AI, which is a little bit of a nebulous term, is because people are interested in it more than that. I think that it's the most important thing right now, and I think that it is one of many. However, to answer your particular question, what particularly within the world of AI am I talking about? Typically, it's what is known as generative AI, which uses predictive technology, predictive analytics to determine, using language models, which is why it's quite interesting for coaching, because a lot of what we do is engaged in language, predicting what a typical sentence would look like given a particular context. So artificial intelligence, some of it, we think of it in a linear, predictable process. So even something like an Excel sum, add this cell to this one, that could be defined by some, certainly marketing and sales people who think that AI is in everything. They would say, this is AI, it's very linear, it's doing everything the same every time. But at the more creative end of the AI spectrum, we have this idea of generative AI, and we can dive into what that actually means if you're interested, where these models are able to predict what a typical outcome could look like. And the reason why this is interesting for me in coaching and supervision is that when you look at the textbooks that tell us, this is a good way to coach, actually it can be, it's relatively narrow, the way that we can use language. A lot of what we do as humans is much more nuanced than that. But the questions themselves, what else would you like to tell me about this issue that you've brought up? That question in itself is a relatively straightforward, in some ways predictable question, but certainly is able to be formed by one of these large language models in a way that feels very dynamic and responsive to what's being presented to them, which is why it's a potential disruptor to the world of coaching, where that ability to have a dynamic, genuinely dynamic, emergent conversation has been impossible with technologies prior to the GPT style. There you go. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so from what you're saying there, Sam, this generative AI is moving us to a place where we could have an interactive conversation with the ChatGPT tool, for example, but it has to understand the context within which it's operating. And for us, that's going to be around coaching supervision. So can you give us some ideas of perhaps how it's currently being used in that context?
Well, individual coaches are certainly capable of using a well-informed prompt to turn ChatGPT into a little quasi-supervisor. And if people haven't tried doing it, go and try it. It's really nice. You know, if you tell it, act as if you're a coaching supervisor, these are the characteristics I want you to show. So I want you to be aware of, I don't know, the ICF competencies or something. I would like you to notice any patterns in what I'm telling you. I would like you to ask me non-directive questions. I would like you to act as if you've got experience and draw from that experience to shape a conversation. And then say, you know, my topic is, I don't know, what's something people bring to supervision. I'm working with a client at the moment who keeps going around in circles, and I don't know how to break that loop. See what ChatGPT does when it's just told, be a good coaching supervisor, that you've told it how to do it. It's brilliant. It's really, really good. You have a really nice time of being able to have a good reflective conversation.
So can I just check in with you there then? Is what you talked about what's referred to as training the GPT model? Is that what you mean, to give it those sort of parameters?
What a brilliant question. And this is good as an illustration of how much we end up getting bombarded with information about new technology, and we don't understand what we're talking about, but we sort of have to work with the little bits that we get. It isn't training. So the models, the way that you train a model is you feed it huge amounts of data. So it's seen conversations, generic conversations. I mean, unbelievably large volumes of data are fed into it. And it uses that data to understand, and I'm using that in inverted commas, it doesn't understand, but to be able to determine that when this word appears and these ones have come before it, the next word is likely to be one of the following set. And based on this understanding, it can generate a prediction, literally, you know, a percentage likelihood. And that percentage likelihood is going to be based across, in some cases, millions of different factors. So, you know, depending on what the context is, this one is more likely against all of these different sort of axes. And therefore, I'm going to select one of these words more likely than others. It might select one of the unlikely ones, but it's more likely to select a more likely one. And what you then get as an output from that entire process is basically a list of numbers associated with each word, and that's the model. So when it is generating a new sentence, it goes and picks the words that are most likely, but it doesn't know what it's doing. It's just picking based on the numbers.
Okay.
What you're doing when you type into ChatGPT, act as if you're a coaching supervisor, is you're prompting it. So it's using that particular model. And there are various different models. So ChatGPT is really a front end which uses the GPT-4. It's got various models, but that one is typically one that you'll use. And so it's using that model, but your prompt is then providing it with the context of how to answer the next questions. So if you just go in acting as if it's the coaching supervisor and say, I've got this thing with my coaching session, it's quite likely to come back with a blog post style response. Oh, have you thought about these bullet points? Which is not what a supervisor would do. So
no, that's really helpful context. And if we take that into the kind of coaching supervision context, then perhaps back to my previous question, which is how is generative AI currently being used in a supervisory way?
Well, the simple answer is not very much at the moment, which isn't too surprising, because when you look at the adoption curve, typically it is older people and females adopt later than younger people and males. And generally speaking, if you look at the demographics of coaching supervisors, it is older people and females. And so that's not a derogatory statement against late adopters. It's just that's what demographics show. You know, that there are exceptions to all of those rules, of course. However, in the coaching supervision space, there are two particular tools that have emerged that are both operating in very similar ways, or they look similar. They're doing slightly different things, but they're quite similar. One is a product called Ray Notes. And what you can do with Ray Notes is you upload a transcription of a coaching session, and Ray Notes will analyze it, it can create the transcription, and then it will allow you to tag particular lines within that transcription with observations as a supervisor or coach mentor. It's particularly designed for submission of transcripts for ICF accreditation, but is used in a coach mentor or supervisor relationship as well. So that's just using AI purely to create the transcription and to break it down into individual sentences. So it's doing something that's clever, but it's not, doesn't feel like it's magic. It's just speeding up the process. The other tool, and it's probably the one that gets the most attention, is one called Ovida. And what you can do in Ovida is you can carry out a coaching conversation live in the platform, in the Ovida platform. And when you finish, then it performs a level of analysis over the session as a whole. And it identifies particular moments. They've got a particular name for it, but, moments of particular interest, which basically happen when the speaker changes. And that's quite interesting, really, because when the speaker changes, you get to notice, this is the moment when I, as a coach, asked a question. Why did I ask it then and not come in earlier? Why did I not leave a bit more space before I asked the next question? As that provides a moment for reflection. And when the coachee starts to speak, then that shows you what question did I ask and how did they respond to it. And even just that simple extraction there gives you some data to reflect on around the amount of time that I spent speaking, how often I stacked questions, of course, the sorts of questions that I asked. And it can also identify in there things like what are the sorts of patterns of language that are repeated most often. And then you're able to access the platform as a supervisor to be able to provide feedback or raise questions based on the specific recordings.
Okay. So it sounds as though it's an aid to a coach and supervisor in terms of providing analysis of a session rather than it taking over as a supervisor or performing a supervisory function. Is that right?
Absolutely. Those two examples are definitely there as pieces of technology for a supervisor and supervisee to use in their engagement. The other tool to sort of throw in there, and it's a little bit of an odd one because it's going through a bit of an evolution at the moment, is called Evoach. And Evoach is a conversation generator, but you've got a bit of a drag and drop facility behind the scenes to be able to say, follow this structure. And one of those is acting as if it is an AI coaching supervisor. I think in very, very practical terms, it's extremely unlikely that there is going to be an AI replacement for a human coaching supervisor at any time in the near future, purely because there isn't the market for it.
Okay, so market rather than technology based, that answer.
Yes, yeah. So like I said, you can go into ChatGPT and prompt yourself your own supervisor. That's a nice experience. I would encourage people to give it a go because then you see what's possible.
Yeah.
And it's also quite nice. Yeah, make your own supervisor in your pocket. It's quite pleasant. I think that human supervisors are still valuable. It isn't the same. Once you've used ChatGPT a few times, you'll notice I do need a human. So it isn't the same. It's not there as a direct replacement. Doesn't mean that it's bad, but there isn't a market at the moment. Supervisors, we don't become a supervisor in order to become a millionaire. And so there isn't going to be an IT platform that is introduced to capitalize on this market because there really isn't one.
I think what you said there will be reassuring to members of the Supervisors Network. But what you have alluded to there is that there are various benefits and advantages to both the coach and the supervisor of using these tools. So I wonder if you could just expand a bit on what you think the primary benefits are of using generative AI in supervision.
Well, I do think that the way that we use technology is best if we understand it and think about it properly. And I think that because of the nature of AI in particular, actually, it's quite interesting the way that it gets captured in the media, is that we get sent to polarized extremes. And so it's quite common to hear people speaking about AI as if it is our savior. This is the thing that is going to bring this leisure class in that's been talked about for more than 100 years. That isn't going to happen. At the other end, then we've got people who are saying, you know, this is going to be the downfall of civilization, and the robots are going to rise up and go to war against us. That isn't going to happen either. What is extremely likely is going to happen is AI is going to become a real thing that has real impact, and things will change, and life will continue, broadly speaking, as normal. It'll be boring, just like it always has been, you know. So it is really helpful, can be really helpful, but we need to sort of think about that in balance of everything else. So it brings some benefits. It also is not, you know, this wonderful utopian dream. So I think the ability, I've got ChatGPT on my phone, the ability I have to take out my phone anytime that I want, tell it how to act as a coaching supervisor. I've got some prompts that I have got saved that I will just copy and paste in to do what I would like it to do. It's good to find your own way. And then off I go. I can have a 10-minute supervision session in the text form on my phone. I can make it speak to me as well. So if I want it audio, that's quite nice as well. And that isn't something that you can do with a human, because unless you've got your supervisor on speed dial and they're very happy for you to call them every moment of the day and not pay, that, you know, actually you're able to do this in a way that it would be impossible with a human. So that's a really great benefit. You know, I can learn some lessons very quickly, do a good bit of reflection, take some good learnings away. However, it doesn't do all sorts of things. It doesn't particularly remember me. You know, even if it sort of half does, it isn't the same. It doesn't care about me. If I don't go back to it, it doesn't notice. You know, it has got no perception of me existing. I don't have a relationship with it. And I know that some products out there, I'm not naming any in the AI, in the coaching space, but some products in the AI space do say, oh, you know, you can form a relationship with your technology. I think that's just unhealthy and unhelpful. And so for my reflective practice, I know that I need a human for it as well. So it can't do everything, and it doesn't have any real experience.
So I'm hearing that it's handy to have, which obviously it is. It's available to us almost 24/7, I guess. And so there's some efficiencies around that. I'm just wondering if we think about it in terms of how effective it is. What do you see as the benefits compared to traditional methods?
Well, I think what supervision is, the first step of what supervision is, it's a lot more than this, of course, but is basically a space for me to reflect on myself. So I can bring, I'm a coach, I bring my practice, I bring an issue that's coming up for me at the moment, just something that I haven't thought about, and just being given the space for me to say out loud, this is what I'm thinking about at the moment. I could be asked the purest Nancy Klein style, what else would you like to say about that sort of question? And I just go through and I say some stuff, and it doesn't matter what I bring. 20 minutes of me just talking out loud and somebody sitting there going, yeah, go on, say a bit more. I'll probably come to a conclusion that is satisfactory and helpful, right? There is value in that. I can now do that on my phone, anywhere that I want to. If I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh, I don't think I asked the right question in my coaching session, then I can bring up my quick quasi supervisor, and then I've got a quick interaction where basically I'm going to end up concluding it's okay. You know, they own their own outcome. I did the best I could in that circumstance. I'm still all right. And that's what I needed in that moment. Depending on the way that you prompt it, it's much less likely to bring that level of challenge that you can sometimes get in a supervision, in a human supervision context. So yes, absolutely, it brings a level of efficiency and convenience. Yes, but it's not the same thing.
No, So you're alluding to some of the challenges there, and we hear quite a lot about the sort of ethical considerations or even potential risks that we need to be aware of. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yes. Again, because of the way that the media presents this, and we get polarized because of the way that the algorithms feed us information around this, it tends to be the case that we end up quite quickly, by necessity almost, subconsciously creating quite extreme perspectives around that sort of thing. But they're often uninformed. So I speak at conferences and interact with people in webinars and that sort of thing around this topic quite a lot. And the ethical issues that are raised are very common. It's the same way everywhere that I go. People are concerned about data privacy. People are concerned about bias. People are concerned about sustainability. People are concerned about the economics of the coaching space, typically, supervision, or, how's this is going to work in 5 years' time, sort of thing. And all of these are vastly overblown, and in most cases are problems that have existed before, and AI has just brought them to the fore. So I'll use data privacy as an example. The concern is raised, well, if I have a conversation with ChatGPT, where does that data go? Who now owns it? Is it used to train the models? And the answer is, well, actually, the answer should be, have you ever asked that question about using Microsoft Teams? Because Microsoft needs to hold that data in order for the conversation to be processed. How else is the conversation happening? Like, it hasn't just got two people in it. It's got this enormous multinational company facilitating the conversation between these two individuals. No coach ever, when I've been present, has asked the question, how about data privacy? We shouldn't be involving Microsoft in a coaching conversation. That's, it's inappropriate to have this huge third party. And then when OpenAI has introduced ChatGPT and we've taken a human out, so now I'm interacting with a smaller company and I'm not talking to another human, it's just me and them, then suddenly it's an issue. I think what we should be thinking is, it was already an issue, a massive issue. It has now been brought to our attention because the human isn't present. Well, the data has to be somewhere, I suppose, doesn't it? And what we should then be thinking is, what data privacy have I been thinking about in the way I use email, in what I post on LinkedIn, whether WhatsApp is secure enough, even if I communicate with my clients about their coaching issues, etc., etc. People generally haven't thought about that. And in almost all cases, GDPR compliance is a given because it is the law. So aiming for GDPR compliance shouldn't be heralded as this great achievement. It's just what you need to do in order to not be doing it illegally. And the information security controls that are in place, generally speaking, are appropriate for what is required. And people aren't looking at the conversations unless they need to for technical support purposes, in which case, most of the time, they just don't care what you're talking about. They're going to check why has the API failed on this occasion. So it's that's a good example of something which it suddenly feels like a massive issue, and it already was an issue, but nobody cared.
Right. From your experience, does knowing that data is going into a generative AI model impinge on people's engagement with it in some way? Because of course, part of what we create in a coaching or supervision space is the openness and the confidentiality to be able to talk about anything. So can these tools get in the way of that?
Well, absolutely, but it's very difficult to quantify. So there was a study that was done around how open people are when they're there in person or when they're there through a mediated platform like Facebook. And people are far more open on Facebook than they would be in person. Would I walk into a business meeting with I'm saying this as a man, with me just in my swimming shorts? No, of course I wouldn't. But I'm happy to make that a public photo on Facebook for literally the entire world to see. And people don't equate those two things. It feels very anonymous to do that on Facebook,
Right.
but I would never do it in person. And so there's this absolute mismatch, and that happens in the case of opening up, being vulnerable about one's personal situation, sort of thing as well. But we do it more when we're doing it through a technology platform rather than in person. That's not necessarily helpful. We should be opening coaching sessions, but we should be thinking about what are the implications of that. When we're talking to an AI model, there is no human there, and there hasn't been any studies done in terms of what the impact of this level of trust that we are then going to have in the technology is going to have on that conversation. So, we just talked about data privacy and the fact it's extremely unlikely somebody will look at the conversation. But by necessity, some people do need access because they can't provide technical support if they're trying to get into a locked room and they don't have the key.
Yeah, okay.
So there needs to be some people. And so for some users of that sort of system, I am sure do not have a level of trust in that company in order to be able to do that. So I know Elon Musk has done a bunch of stuff politically recently that has made some people extremely cross, and they've therefore left the platform. It's an example of where I'm going to refuse to engage because I don't trust the people. Well, if you've never met Sam Altman or the team at OpenAI or any of the other, Google's got Gemini and there are these other models out there, that's going to stop people being as open, because when my AI coach that is run on Google's Gemini model says, what's most important to you at the moment? I might think, well, I don't want to tell Google what's important to me, so I'm going to lie. And that's then not helpful for me as a recipient of the AI coach or supervisor.
Most of what you've talked about so far, I think, has been about me as an individual interacting with AI in some way. I'm just wondering about me as supervisor with my supervisee and AI in the room, so the three-way conversation. Is that a possible way of utilizing it?
You could. The way that I would do that conceptually, I haven't done it. No, they're trying to think. Oh no, I'll tell you what, there is an example of how I've done something like that I'll sort of go around before I say it. Okay, so I've forgotten where I started, so I'll just go for my example. So this is how see, is my mind going to go there? No, this is what happens as humans, you see. Our minds will go in funny directions. With an AI, you don't get that. It just goes down one route. Sometimes it will give up because it runs out of memory, but most of the time it will continue. It feels very cohesive, what it presents. This is how I have used it in supervision, and I have used it with coaching as well, is I will use AI as a reflective tool to create an image, like a generative image in the moment. So as a supervisee, you come in and say, I don't know how to deal with this particular coachee. What should I do? And so we'll bring up an artwork generator, which is based on AI, type in the prompt. I'm a coachee who is projecting images of their mother onto me as the coach. For example, that's quite extraordinary, isn't it? And then press generate, and it will create a piece of artwork that is informed by that prompt. And most of the time, because the prompts that we type are not what you would use to create artwork, it's going to be quite abstract, or it's going to capture one particular, quite likely to capture the word mother and give you a picture of a maternal figure. Now we've got a picture, but the picture is going to have stuff in it. It's going to have colors and brush strokes and stuff in the background, and we can say, let's now reflect on this topic, but using the abstraction of the creativity, just like you would with picture cards, in the old world. This is what I was going to say, that the way that you could use AI, it's really good for turning unstructured data into structured data. Humans are not good at this. It takes us absolutely ages, and we do it inconsistently. AI can do it at massive scale and do it in a very similar way every time. So what you could do, for example, of course, with the permission of a coaching client, you could take a transcript from a coaching session and just feed that into an AI. And I, as the supervisor, never see the transcript, but I say to the ChatGPT or whatever, I'd like you to produce a report based on what you've seen in this transcript to describe to me the character of the coach, tell me what assumptions they have running in their head as they're asking their questions, point out anything that was spoken about that they didn't ask questions about, And now we have got some really good focused areas to dive into that sounds quite exciting, actually. I'd be well up for something like that.
It does. Now that you've said it, I think we need to experiment with that. It sounds like it has great potential. If we are thinking about how people can engage with this, it can feel like there's an awful lot of avenues that one could go down to explore it. So, what kind of training or upskilling do you think supervisors need to be able to start engaging with generative AI?
This is a problem that the volume of what is available is so great. And as supervisors, we are not required to be technical experts. And so what's enough for us to know to be better in our roles and informed enough without learning how to code in JavaScript, which, that's the opposite end of the spectrum. But there are two broad approaches I would suggest for this. One, sorry, this is a shameless plug, but I have got an online community where we experiment with tools on a monthly basis. And there is so much news out there. I write a report and it's more than 10 pages every month. And that's the bits that I selectively include that I think are most relevant. So there's so much out there that actually joining a community like this one gives you an opportunity to just identify, okay, what is most recent? What could I experiment with? Maybe one of those every so often you'll think, oh, that could make a massive difference in my practice. So I think that's a good thing to do. The second thing is a little bit more evergreen, which would be try to get an understanding of the basic frameworks upon which all of technology operates. So, my job a lot of the time is seeing what is the latest technology and what's the technology that's about to be coming. And I can tell you right now, all of them bring the same sorts of benefits. They present the same sorts of risks. They're the same sorts of ethical dilemmas that are presented by all of them. They take different forms. Generative AI is a different sort of technology from email, the email protocols that were first introduced to the World Wide Web, right? It's different, but the risks are the same and the benefits are the same, at a level of abstraction that is possible to then grapple with. So then once you understand that, for example, one of these, it's an obvious one, is efficiency. The technology can do things faster. If you are simply then going to ask the question, here's a new piece of technology, what's the thing that it does faster? Because if I can understand that, then I can identify, okay, it does this thing faster, which is better. Efficiency is generally better on the factor that it's efficient. It's going to make something else worse, probably. Cars take us physically from point A to point B faster, also increases the risk of injury. You're more likely to get hurt here by a car than by a bike. So I can recognize, this is a thing that it does, but there is a downside. So then I just need to think, how can I mitigate that downside? Generative AI, it is so fast. You can say, write me 2,000 words on this topic in a way that a 13-year-old would understand it. And it will do exactly that. And it will do it so quickly. What it's doing when you understand it is it's taking all of the possible words that could be there and it's trying to pick what is one of the most likely words, which basically means it's going to give you the average answer to the question you're giving it in the prompt, which in some ways is brilliant. If that's what you want, explain quantum computing to me in 2 sentences, but in a way that I can understand it as a complete layperson. Suddenly you get a new understanding of quantum computing that you can't really get any other way. It's fast. It's also, even though it's often called creative, it's not very creative because it is the average. So in a supervision context, where often you want to give something that's a bit surprising and you want to shake things up a little bit, an AI is going to take you down the same sort of generic middle of the road approach every time. So we can bring something that's different.
So what advice would you give to a supervisor who's perhaps skeptical or cautious about integrating AI into their practice?
Well, the first thing that I would do is, if you haven't already, and I think more and more people are doing it, so most people probably have. And if you're one that hasn't, I'm telling you, most people have. So you're behind the curve. You actually are. Get a ChatGPT account. Doesn't have to be ChatGPT. There are other ones. Claude is another good one. It's probably slightly better in some ways, but ChatGPT is the one that people use as the example. So get an account with one of these large language model providers and just play. See how good you can get your own supervisor. And what you will discover through that process is you'll discover how good it can be. And it's very nice, so it's nice to have somebody like that sitting next to you. And if you get that off your phone, brilliant efficiency. However, you'll also learn what it's really limited at. And no matter how hard you try to get it to do it, it will never cross this line. Now, the models are always improving, but the textbook example for this is try to get it to be silent. Just sit in silence for 10 seconds and then give me your response. It cannot do that. It doesn't understand the passing of time. It's not able to do it. So once you've played around with it a bit, then you'll discover, oh, it's really good at this stuff, better than me. As a coach, as a supervisor, AI can outperform me on loads of stuff. And also it can't even begin to start to do some of the things that I can do. And so if I move my practice in that direction, I'm making myself much more valuable now, because the AI, maybe a coach somewhere will just get an AI for the supervisor for that bit. So if all I'm doing is just asking good open questions, why shouldn't they go to an AI, really?
Sure.
So let's do something different.
So what I'm reassured from our conversation is we're still going to need humans. That's been a clear message in what you've said. So, and then actually I can probably learn and develop my own practice by engaging with AI. The potential for me to actually perhaps improve the quality of the questions that I ask, or gain different paths that I could explore with a coachee. So quite a lot of positives in that. So thanks very much for sharing what you have. I wonder whether you've got final thought or a key takeaway to leave with our audience.
Well, I think with some particular approaches, you can use AI as a really good role model, particularly if it's to do with language. If you like, for example, a clean language approach, instruct ChatGPT to become a really skilled clean language supervisor, and then interact with it as if you are a supervisee coming to a supervision session with somebody who only uses clean language. Observe what is happening there. For a start, you will really enjoy it. And also at the end of the conversation, you can look back and go, that's interesting. Isn't it interesting? Why did it pick up on this particular thing here? And it's not thinking when it's doing it. It doesn't understand what's happening, but it will act in the way that you sort of should do. And it can be a really good reflective opportunity. So yeah, go and have a play and see what happens.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. I'm hoping that many of our members will go and dip their toe in the water, or perhaps even, push their thinking a bit further with this. It's been super to connect with you, and thanks for your time and for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks for having me, Neil. Great to be here.